moving. All right. So what are some other things that are not cloud computing? Storing all of your information on a server in your office. That's not really cloud computing. It's centralized in one location. Software that's actually installed directly on your computer. Also not cloud computing. Okay. Watching a movie that you saved to a USB or a DVD drive, not cloud computing, but watching a movie on Netflix or something like that could be considered cloud computing. Okay. So, are you already using cloud computing? Like I said earlier, if you're using a video streaming service of any type and it's available over the internet, guess what? You're using a form of cloud computing. If you're hosting a Zoom meeting that people want to, click on things and make fools of themselves, guess what? You're actually using a cloud product, Google products, Microsoft OneDrive, or if you have a website that's hosted by somebody else, not hosted by you. A lot of these are in the cloud, considered cloud computing because they're spread out. You're not actually, if you're going to Disney Plus or you're using Netflix, you're not hitting one server or one specific geographic location. A lot of these are set up so they're actually all over the place. So you could be hitting things anywhere from the Midwest to California to overseas. Just depends on what products you are using. Okay. We break it down into two real different versions of cloud computing. There's the SaaS model and the infrastructure as a service model, the IaaS model. I always say that one wrong. Sorry. But the software as a service model is things like HubSpot, Dropbox, Google Workspace, Gmail, Office 365. These are just software that they give to you that you're using. Okay. Infrastructure as a service is a little different, and we'll talk about this a little bit more. Rackspace is a good example of one. Amazon Web Services. You probably have heard that buzzword in the past, and you're probably like, okay, I've heard this before. What is it? Kind of talk about that a little bit more. Google Cloud Infrastructure, Microsoft Azure. So a way to think about this is infrastructure as a service is just the products and where they're all stored, but then the products themselves or is the software as a service. Okay. So infrastructure as a service, that would basically be like, you have a server that's out in the cloud. That is infrastructure as a service. Okay. If you're a company and you haven't looked at hosting a server out in the cloud instead of buying one that sits locally, that's the kind of the difference here. Infrastructure as a service is just that. You're basically paying somebody else to host it and make sure that it's safe and all those good things. And we'll talk about that a little bit. Software as a service, simply put, it's just software or an application that's hosted by a third-party provider, and it's just made available over the internet. The software often can be installed on your workstation, but generally it's not. And it's installed centrally in a central location by the provider. It eliminates your need for any additional servers or storage, anything like that. And all the updates are generally maintained by the provider. So if you're in the accounting world and you're trying to think of what software as a service, it's probably your QuickBooks Online, things of that nature. Okay. The advantages of software as a service, I would say some of the advantages and disadvantages are the cost, the pricing models. Sometimes these are quite expensive, but there are companies now that will do them free or ad-based, which is kind of an intriguing way to go. It's nothing like watching a movie to, take advantage of a piece of software. Some of them have a flat rate, but most often we're seeing a per user, per company kind of license. And other advantages are your availability. I always like to tell people I love having our email cloud hosted because I could be sitting anywhere in the continental US, even on a beach, working, even though my wife and family probably wouldn't care for that too much. And some of these software as a service even have some offline modes. which allows you to not use the internet and still access the application. A lot of these, like HubSpot, I talked about it earlier, that's a CRM. That's actually one that we like and use. You can do company branding on these pieces of software. So let's say you're going to like my help desk software, another example of software as a service. I can brand it so it says my name versus their name. So when you go there, it looks as if it's me, but it's really being hosted out in the cloud. Okay. Some can also integrate with other systems, especially if they're all cloud-based systems. A good example of this is QuickBooks Online. You know, a lot of these softwares like HubSpot, it'll integrate into the Office suite or the Google suite. So they have these integration pieces because they all have a programming language that they all subscribe to that they can talk back and forth. Advantages and sometimes disadvantages of software as a service. The provider may offer support to help. Okay, don't necessarily have to use an IT provider to have help with your email. If you are using like Microsoft Office 365, you could call Microsoft. Sometimes though, I'll tell you the disadvantage of doing that is if you've ever had to call Microsoft and sit on hold, or the IRS, very similar type thing, you sit on hold for hours. Okay, pretty terrible. So the other thing is, the other advantage that I like is the security side of the SaaS, is that provider is really kind of in charge of a lot more of the security pieces and the breaches than you having a piece of software locally on your own network. I like to tell people, if you have something locally on your computer, on your servers, in your home office, who is watching all of that? What's going on? What threats are out there? Making sure that things are patched. If you're not watching it, or your IT provider is not watching it 24/7, 365, that's the reason why to go to a software as a service, because you're not paying a ton of money for somebody to actually monitor these things, because these providers, a lot of times, they're doing that already for you. Okay. Infrastructure as a service. This one's interesting. Okay, if you are a small to mid-sized business and you don't want to buy a server and have a bunch of people accessing that server via a computer, you could actually build basically your entire work office out in the cloud. So you could actually have a server and workstations for people to work from in the cloud. That's where everything's virtualized, so it's actually really cool. You are paying monthly for these, and we'll kind of get to that a little bit, but it really allows you to have your resources not in the office. So your cost maybe isn't something that is costing you a ton of money up front, and it's just going to end up being like a monthly subscription base that allows you to basically rent these resources on demand. These are super scalable. So lots of times, if you have the money and you want to do a big enough server and workstations, things like that, you can actually scale it as big as you want. And then you can downscale it as well. You can make, let's say you have 50 employees one day and you decide to increase it to 75 and you want to give them all resources. You could do that just at the click of a button. But then let's say you want to rein it back. Maybe you got a little overzealous. You can rein it back to, in the 60s. Perfect. You can actually give them workstations and take workstations away. And lots of times your cost per will just fluctuate on what you're using, what you're consuming. It's like a consumption-based model. Okay. So what are some of the advantages? So I had mentioned a desktop earlier. Okay. You could actually have these desktops for your employees as if they're sitting in the office, available all the time. And you can use less powered workstations in front of them and a higher powered one out in the cloud. That might seem a little confusing, but basically what I'm doing is I'm just using the desktop in front of me, or the workstations, laptop, Chromebook, whatever it may be, to connect out to the cloud. And that's where I'm doing all of my work. The box in front of me is really just the display to get me there. Okay. The price this is crucial for those of you that might have multiple locations. You can actually allocate the expense of the equipment to the individual companies that they belong to, maybe the individual locations. Like I said, you can rent these on demand, you can cancel when you don't need them. And then the support, a lot of these companies that do infrastructure as a service also have generally resources that are out there that can actually help you, can make sure that everything's running appropriately. So really, infrastructure as a service is a piece of software as a service, okay? Software as a service, I just want it to work. I don't care about the details. Infrastructure as a service, I don't want to deal with the servers, and I want to actually build something to put into place for this, basically a piece of software, okay? Or I just want a place to put my programs. A lot of people that do coding or scripting, things like that, the people that are a little bit more nerdy than myself, hard to believe, right? They would actually rent these locations to actually have pieces of software that they're developing. It's actually a really cool place for them to have almost their own little sandbox. So like I said earlier, cloud services generally are way more secure than having something on site. The traffic can be monitored to go back and forth, and it's really nice because disaster recovery is super easy in this scenario as well. This isn't on the slide, but a lot of this data, like I said, it's not in one location. It's not like in your office. So think about if you had all your eggs in one basket, it's in your office, and something happened to your office. Let's say you had a flood and you had to call my friends over at Restoration One, right? They would probably tell you, oh yeah, that server's toast. All your eggs that were in that basket are going to be a problem. If you're in the cloud, guess what? It's in multiple locations. So you potentially could still run everything without any problems whatsoever in the case of a disaster, okay? And security is so huge because these cloud infrastructure companies are investing more money than you and I probably have combined in their security. So it really helps make sure that everything is safe and working. So let's make your cloud environment safer. I said it once, I'm going to say it a million more times. You need to turn on two-factor authentication. I also call it multi-factor authentication. Things like Duo, Microsoft Authenticator, the Google Authenticator. You can use multiple. Trust me, you can use multiple. If you don't have multi-factor enabled, reach out to your IT provider, get it enabled. Can't say enough about it. Use strong passwords that contain upper and lower cases, numbers, hieroglyphics, symbols, and don't reuse your passwords. You all know who you are, that use that same password for everything. So two-factor authentication, I'll just jump into this just a little bit. Instead of needing to access one device or one password, really, the attacker has to be able to intercept things either on an app or an SMS to your phone. So it really makes it so much harder for any sort of attacker to get in and try to do anything, because the odds are they're not going to be able to intercept what's going on in your phone. Okay. So this is just another tab reselling you on multi-factor authentication, two-factor authentication. I really think you all, if you're not doing it already in your personal life and in your work life, you need to. It's the only way to really keep yourself safe. Okay. So we are going to talk a little bit about like the measured services. These are different things that you could potentially get charged for if you went to a cloud-based infrastructure. And really you're paying for consumption. Okay. If let's say you want to move your entire environment, let's say you're a small manufacturing company in Woodstock, Illinois, and you want to move everything out to the cloud. Lots of times you'll get a charge on server-based type things for the server, how much you're using, how much memory, which is, how fast things will run, or how much space you're utilizing. You're only paying for that piece. So if you shut it off at nights and weekends, you're paying less. Okay. And you sometimes will get hit with charges for technical support if you run into a need for it. But lots of times these providers are actually including it nowadays. And if you're using some of the SaaS model type things, the applications can be free, but you're collecting data about you and selling it to advertisers. So things like that. Facebook, nothing in life is free. Facebook is not a free app. Just keep in mind that you're using software as a service. Okay, it's a piece of software, and the way that you're paying for it is your data. You are giving that to them. Same thing with Google Chrome. Everybody's like, I love Google Chrome. You have to understand you're paying the piper. Okay, it's software as a service, and the way that they are making money on you is your data and your browsing history. Okay. So this is just a kind of a, it's more of like a sales type thing. You'll see this on some of the sales for doing software as a service or infrastructure as a service. They give you kind of the different methods in which you can bring everything together. Resource pooling, that's if let's say I have multiple, so I'm going to start at the upper left and kind of go down. Resource pooling, if you have multiple devices, workstations that are all using the same resources, you can actually just buy a bundle of them and just kind of have them all in a giant pool for you to be able to pull from. On-demand self-service, that would just basically mean that you wouldn't necessarily have to go through like an IT provider for any sort of thing that you might need. If you need to add additional computers or remove them, you could actually do that all in your all by yourself. Easy maintenance. Lots of times the IT providers that are actually dishing up these infrastructure as a service or software as a service actually give you the maintenance included with it. Large network access, that would be if you are like a huge organization, you want to go to the cloud. It's super easy to actually set this all up versus in a traditional sense where you would have to hire an outside IT company to come in and do things. The availability, again, all this infrastructure as a service, software as a service is 24/7, 365. Actually, they generally will give you discounts if they have any interruption in service. The automatic systems, kind of self-explanatory. A lot of these processes, things that they're doing in the back end is all automatic. You don't have to think about it. It's economical. It's actually a lot cheaper than you'd think for having a lot of the infrastructure as a service or even a software as a service. Security, again, we've kind of hit that horse a couple of times. You're paying them. That's part of their what they're providing you is additional security. Pay as you go. If you won't have that upfront cost, and if you want to measure things, I love this aspect of cloud services, especially infrastructure as a service. If you want to measure productivity, workload, things like that, you can actually do a lot of that measurements from dashboards that these providers actually give you. So pretty cool, worth checking out. Again, you've got some less overhead. You don't need to waste time installing a lot of programs. A lot of these can actually come automatically. You have lowered risk. Any programs that are pre-installed, they're already going to be, pre-designed to actually work in this environment, and they're going to be easy to use. And a lot of these, you're only paying for what you use, and you don't have a maximum capacity. So some services, and I know I'm starting to run a little late on time. Some specific services that you're already using: Google Workspace, 365, Squarespace. Squarespace, I've mentioned it earlier. Really, that is just a cloud provider that has infrastructure as a service. It's a big one. We use them. They're great. Microsoft Azure. Some of you might be like, I've heard the name, but I don't know what exactly it does. It's kind of the highest point of Microsoft. So you're probably used to Office 365. Azure kind of controls all of those pieces down, right? It's the brains of Microsoft. It does so much more, but I'm only going to really touch on that today. I could talk for hours on it. So software as a service, Outlook, Teams, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, OneDrive. Cloud storage is software as a service, and OneDrive is no different from that. Google Workspace is also a software as a service. So your Gmail, your calendars, your Meet, your Google Drive, your Docs, Sheets, and Slides. Those are all part of software as a service. Squarespace, this is a pretty common one. We run into this quite a bit for people, and it's a website creator. It also has some email kind of things, and also can do some POS pieces as well. Squarespace is great for a new company that's starting up because it gives you like templates to build your website to make it really easy. It also hosts your website. The only problem that you run into with Squarespace, and I'll just throw this out there, is if you ever try to move away from it, it's kind of a pain. Amazon Web Services, this is one of those infrastructure as a service. Basically, it's a lot like Rackspace, but bigger, much bigger. It's pretty much the same Amazon that you're used to buying stuff on, but it's a little bit more intense. They'll rent you server space, they'll give you analytics, they'll host applications if you just want to have them hosted out to the world. And the biggest one that we run into is backup services. Amazon Web Services is amazing to have your backups sitting on because it's literally spread all across the US and very secure. You've probably heard of Amazon S3 buckets. Maybe you haven't, maybe I just threw out a new term for you. But that's what us nerds actually refer to your backups as. Azure can do a little bit more than it used to be able to. It'll host virtual machines, virtual desktops, and it also does Active Directory, which is identity and access management for workstations. So it's probably going to be its own webinar. It might be a little bit more advanced because it can do so much. I love Azure, but again, probably not something that you'll run into too often as a normal user. Okay, so I just ran through that all really fast. Sorry for the interruptions earlier. We'll work on getting those cleared up here in the future.
Thanks, Eric. We just had one question back when you were talking about Google Chrome, is when it came in. You mentioned, everyone loves Google Chrome, but you are having to share your data. Is there a pro then to use Google Chrome incognito mode, or how would you, or is there another browser, I guess, that you would provide?
So, Chrome in itself is, in my mind, a necessary evil nowadays. It's one of the best that's out there. Incognito doesn't really give you much protection from when you're using it. So I would say if you're really concerned about privacy, there are other browser options out there. I believe there's one called like the Brave browser, not super common yet, very buggy. I don't know that I'd necessarily recommend it if you are a small to mid-sized business owner. If you're using it at home, I find that Firefox tends to do just as good of a job as Google. And initially, Firefox was built with privacy in mind, but over time now that it's been purchased, I'm finding it's not. Your privacy really isn't there. So if you are using the internet and privacy is a concern of yours, you almost just have to go into the internet knowing nothing is private on the internet. Like that's kind of the end of the day now lately.
All right, thank you. That was the only question we had, so we'll go ahead and let everybody go, but we appreciate you joining today. And again, apologize for the people on earlier, but we hope you found this helpful. And after this webinar, we'll be sending out a video if you'd like to rewatch it, and then watch for our future Tech Talk announcements. Thanks, everyone.